Welcome to this podcast. Here we discuss introspection, being, development, and all the good stuff. Welcome, this is Baruch Menache. I want to discuss today the non-being and the being paradox nature. So on one side we have this existence, vitality, the stride of man, if you call it. And on the other side, we have death, despair, depression, complete failure of existence, and the unknown, right? So there's the known and the unknown, and they coincide and they exist together. And I want to explain this or expound on this in a way where we're connecting it back to our biological nature and the parent-child relationship. Okay, because a child, right, a newborn child exists from the semen of the parent and from the eggs of the parent. So, in essence, they're coming from this unknown because there's nothing revealed in a microscopic piece of nature that is the human being, that is existence. And it's even strange for me to say because of how separate these two worlds are. It's the human fully formed newborn, and then it's semen-like nature, and this microscopic scientific little world that even tells us that there is something there, because the naked eye doesn't even comprehend the small elements in something so insignificant. So, in reality, the human being is both from this insignificant nowhere place because it's coming from another human being. And so what makes them human out of that human being? There's that human being, fully formed, existent, and then there's this new development of something else. So what you're going to call it a partialization of the parent, or you're going to call it some existence of its own. So the human always stands in contrast to its shadow, which is the parent, because the parent controls all of life, all of existence, and somehow there's this evolution where the child is coming out of that and gains its own autonomy and existence. So when we see it like that, we recognize that we're always conflicted. Are we the parent, or are we the existent child? And if anything, that is the experience of a child at its most fundamental sense. Am I an autonomous human being that deserves its own existence, or am I just something, an offshoot, or not even an offshoot, almost a mistake of the result of something else, and therefore I, as a human being, don't deserve my existence, because what is I in relation to that bigger human being above me? So because that conflict is there, the child will seek out the validation and the recognition specifically of who? The parent. And in that love and validation, the parent is saying, no, you're not from me technically. Technically you are, but figuratively you're not from me. And there's something distinct and special and unique and human about you. And the more the parent validates that, the more the child gains their own experience of existence. Now, there's no point where the child or the human ever gets to a place where that unknown space, where it's just semen and biological substance from generations behind, and this microscopic world that can't even be recognized as any human form, and this real human being that's facing us, that contrast, that will always be there. And so whatever we face in our life will have both the non-being and the being, the existence and its unknown backdrop that it exists within. It's this dark matter that we are surrounded by that allows us to be. But still, we are who we are, and there's a clear relevance and meaning and existence to our unique space in the world in terms of that dark matter. Okay, so because of this inherent conflict, we need to seek throughout our life. I say need in the way of we necessitate, we inherently need to find the fortitude to face that backdrop, because we're haunted in a real fundamental sense by the unknown that we are derived from, and the unknown that's around us, that the destabilization of our existence, and we need to face that in some weird sense. But the problem is that we don't have the tools to face all that unknown because of the nature of the fact that it's unknown, because of the nature that it doesn't have the human characteristics that allow me to tackle it in an intellectual, emotional way, because it's distant from me by its nature. So what happens is there's this constant dialogue between selfhood in a comfortable, vital way, and then selfhood in the insignificant, destabilized way. So that paradox creates what is all conversation, what is all, because we're never going to get the answer that will say, oh, now we got it, because we'll always be faced. For instance, the medieval era and residue still remains now of this obsession with the afterlife to give that answer, right? Because the afterlife says that, no, all that chaos, the chaos of the fact that we come from insignificant places and we come from irrelevancy and darkness and unknown, that world out there is actually our world, and we eventually have a meeting place where we unite those worlds and we become all that unknown in an enlightened sense. The problem is that we're still contending with the fact that we're not living in that existence. So in the realm of imagination, we could find some solace in that, but in the realm of realistic terms, we still have to contend with being versus non-being. Vital self versus existential chaos. Okay, so that's the one of the fundamental paradoxes of a human being. Now, what's there to do about it? Okay, so there's one solution, which is to attach oneself to the collective, which is that one neglects the full individual and by default this crisis of the individual, and says that no, I'm a part of this collective, and the collective is internal in some sense, meaning it exists after the individual death, maybe not for long, but exists in the realm of our purview. It exists beyond us, so it's eternal in that sense. And that gives the answer to our own struggle with life and death, our own struggle with the unknown and the known. The problem being of the collective is that there is no individual expression. And that means that one is controlled by something that they can't be conscious of. The consciousness is in the collective, and the individual doesn't gain any developed consciousness in that. So that if the collective goes one way, they're with that, and the collective goes another way, they're with that. Even if there's a backdrop in their mind of something deeper, they don't have the fortitude to access that, because they've they've alleviated their existential crisis on the collective. Now, this also happens on the individual, especially with relationships, because one can take this existential paradox and place it on all their relationships, so that when they're in deep emotional dialogue, like the Romantics, they take the other person and say they're the answer to this, because in one sense they're being, but in another sense they're eternal outside of myself. They're in that space. They take the space of all that unknown chaos, and they become the answer to all anxiety and true pain. The problem is that one is alleviating, like letting go to the collective, one is alleviating their selfhood in entirety to someone else. And that, as we discussed, that creates a codependent relationship that ends up killing everybody, because everybody loses selfhood and there's no autonomy, and then there's no development and no opening of consciousness and whatnot. Okay. Let's get practical with Western views on things and see how the West has been dealing with it and how they're struggling with that perception. Well, it's not a secret that the West, it's explained well in the American dream idea, where the collective West, or America, says that as long as you're producing without any boundaries, you're in deep progress state where no limitations are, meaning some sort of immortality in the individual, meaning an individual has all the fortitude within themselves to access whatever they want, however they want, in this pathological, directed, progressive way, then they can alleviate all this chaos of, like, are you the son or the father? Like, who cares? We're part of this bigger picture that's going forward. And then death doesn't matter because progress is continuing. And anxiety and health and all that doesn't matter because we can overcome everything, however, whenever, to the goal of progress and productivity. Okay, so perfect. That might be the answer. And then we come to the 2000s, and we come to this new era where the tools that were created by this extreme amount of productivity became so much and took over so much of our lives that deeper questions just kept coming up. Like, why am I here? Why is this video here? Why are we on phones? Why are we in these worlds? And what do they have to do with us? And what do we have to do with them? And what does that mean for all the elements of depth? And if all information is accessible, what does information mean? And like all that productivity that was obtained, the answer cannot be for more productivity, because the productivity itself is asking the question of, why am I here? So one might say in the 80s that be responsible, take care of your family, do the job well, get home. That simplistic, narrow version, that doesn't work anymore, because, okay, so what's this for? Whatever you're doing, what's the home for? What's, like, we need answers to the productivity that we are sacrificing all of selfhood for. So we're meeting the backside of this, the shadow of this ideology or this Western perception to answer the existential dilemma that we're all facing. The answer, as some may put, would be that, let's go backwards. Let's go to a place where one can let go of all this openness and all this femininity and all this productivity, all this all these questions of meaning, and let's go back to a place where things were simple. In the traditionalist view, like things were just as they were. There was clear roles and everything, and things were perfect. Yet by doing that, they're not taking into account that the questions are still there. So they might get back to a place where everything is perfect in an old adage of a religion, but the existential crisis or the deep meaning questions that are coming up because we are existent in an unknown place. There's no real reason for our existence in the scheme of things, and we need real answers to that. That's not going to do justice because the questions are so large that only head-on conversation about them will give answers. It's like saying someone has a problem in one area, let's go to another area and somehow that problem will get alleviated. But that's not true when this problem is exploding. So what ends up happening is the traditionalists, the people that go into these places, like, let's get back. Okay, we messed up. We're in a crisis. Let's get back. Somewhere in the history, there's something true here, and we could just hang on to that. And that will give us some alleviation from the anxiety we're facing. When they do that, what ends up happening is they get so extreme in those spaces because they're constantly trying to alleviate something that they're not willing to face in its real adaptation. So they either get really extreme in their view of traditionalist, or they get really extreme in applying this, changed version of that. They change the religion in a way, or the theology in a way where it wouldn't even be considered such in its real time in history. I mean, we found this parallel in, I'm not well versed, but just in speculation, we found this parallel in the terrorist era, where hopefully this is the end of it, but like the terrorist era where one used the traditionalist view as an answer to an existential crisis, but in doing so, they even whatever period of history they're trying to go back to and capture, in that period of history, it was never taken at that extreme, and so they're not really going back. They're just taking something from history and just making it more monstrous in a modern version. I mean, if we're talking Muslim, I mean, there's this golden age in the Islamic culture that's just prolific in all their endeavors and the poetry and the writings and even the astronomy and the mathematics and whatnot. And like that is like very close to its original intent. And so if you're going to be traditionalist, then why not explore that as well? But what's happening is that it's not possible to go backwards in time and just take and act like this new age didn't affect you in a profound manner. Like, we have to take in the current conversation. Okay, so what then is the answer? Okay, so first of all, there's no answer because it's a paradox. Are you a human being or just a part of your father? Like, who are you? Okay, so that paradox is still there. Now, granted, the questions are much stronger and much more potent to a point where we feel we're living in the unknown more than the known. And that's problematic because then we can't experience vitality, being. We can't stride. We can't be life. We live more of death than life. But that means just expanding your horizon in the realm of what you became conscious about. Because this is the interesting thing about nature. If you're not conscious about something, then it's not problematic. If you don't know there's a problem, there is no problem. If one doesn't know there's a leak, until that leak comes out and into reality, into the known, it doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist for the human being. Now, practically speaking, yeah, there's things that are happening, but because they don't know about it, it's not there. So it is the fact that we became way more conscious about things due to our productivity, due to the extreme lever forward, the throttle to progress. And so, boom, we're facing 10 times the amount of conscious. We're aware of everything. We're aware of deep masculinity and femininity in a way that never was. That awareness, the answer to that is to face it with more awareness, more study, more intellect, more to find its intricacies and answer its questions. Because really what it is just questions, and they need real answers that suffice to the level of consciousness, meaning an adult, right, that is in dialogue about a topic, say psychology, and they're talking about some technique or whatever. The conversation, the other side of that conversation must be in congruence with their level of consciousness about the subject. So say if all of a sudden a master professor in psychology was in discussion, there would be things that would get confused in the conversation, because one person is fully explored in the area, and one is just tapping into some rudimentary parts of it. And the same thing with a child. You can't speak to a child like you speak to an adult, because their consciousness about whatever you're speaking about is just not as expanded. So that because our consciousness has been enlarged and expanded at such a potent level, the answer is to give answers, to be in dialogue at a higher level. And what happened in the 90s and the early 2000s was the answer was the opposite. The answer was, let's go to a more simplistic, joking level. Let's go to a more cynical level, and somehow we'll forget the explored consciousness that we've obtained. But that's not possible, because once you know something, you know there's a leak, you can never unforget that leak. You can make jokes about it, you could dance around it, you could create films of cynicism about it, but what occurs is that it's still there in the mind, and it stays there, and it never goes away until the problem is fixed. So what we're saying is that the conversation needs to be updated to this way higher level of consciousness. And the approach of cynicism, the approach of comedic entertainment or external stimuli it's good for like a Band-Aid. If someone's in an existential crisis in the morning, they're not till the afternoon, but the evening all of a sudden hits them with an even larger existential worry about. It's not an existential worry, it's just this unknown that they're not contending with. And to contend with that unknown needs the most expansive exploratory levels of wisdom and knowledge, and what's amazing is that stuff is available as never before, right? It just as the printing press, distributed books in a mass manner, we have all knowledge distributed in a free, accessible manner. So we need to enter that space to contend with that higher level of conversation that's needed. That being said, I do believe that there is a resurgence of that. And I believe that the public discourse that I see is way more developed than, let's say, it would be in the 15s or the 10s. And we are in a path of giving a more creative, more truthful, more serious answer to these serious questions. That being said, there is still this possibility to fall into collective movements of all sorts that will try to give the quick answer to this, as opposed to the slow, methodical approach through wisdom, knowledge, philosophy, psychology, the arts, in a very unified, very universal, but very specific manner. So, like, I hope that that's where the conversation goes, and that we make progress as that moving culture of the Western civilization. Thanks for listening.